has given the most remarkable, devoted service to the Queen, to my family, and to the country, and also to the whole of the Commonwealth.
The decision was delivered without ceremony, yet its consequences struck the palace like a thunderclap. King Charles had issued a final written order transferring Queen Elizabeth's sapphire brooch set directly to Catherine, Princess of Wales. No temporary loan, no shared custody, no possibility of reversal. As the document crossed the polished table, one royal future appeared to brighten. But elsewhere inside the palace, another figure understood that something deeply personal had just been taken away. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles remained alone after the advisor left. He kept one hand against the signed page, as though lifting it would make the choice final. The royal collection, the group of historic objects preserved for official use, had guarded these sapphire and diamond brooches for years. Elizabeth wore them through national celebrations, private sorrow, and solemn duty. They carried the memory of her reign, and the king had moved that memory toward the monarchy's future. He pulled his hand away and spoke into the silence. Giving up part of his mother's legacy, he admitted, felt like closing a door he could never reopen. Yet the order was absolute. It placed the set permanently under Catherine's personal custodianship, meaning she would control its care, preservation, and future royal use. One sentence carried the deepest meaning. She was best positioned to preserve the late sovereign's intended continuity. Charles had not simply distributed jewels, he had declared who could carry Elizabeth's symbolism into the next generation. Catherine received the news beside William and said nothing. She pressed her fingers against the table, while the prince watched shock settle across her face. The future queen understood the danger. Wearing the sapphires would connect her to decades of service, but critics could mistake duty for ambition. William moved closer and told her that responsibility was not triumph. She nodded, though his reassurance did not lighten the burden. A courtier, examining the authorization, noticed one dangerous omission. Camilla's office had never been consulted, even though the queen consort had previously worn pieces connected to Elizabeth's collection. When the message reached her, she asked whether the decision could be reviewed. The reply came without softness. Catherine had accepted, the transfer was permanent, and Charles would not reverse it. Camilla lowered the paper and remained silent. Her expression revealed more than disappointment. It carried recognition, as though the order had reopened a wound formed long before the sapphires changed hands. But before the palace could understand why Charles had chosen Catherine, it first had to confront what the sapphires represented to every person now caught inside the decision. The sapphires did not enter an empty room. They arrived carrying decades of memory, expectation, grief, and rivalry. To Charles, they were fragments of a mother he still struggled to mourn. To Catherine, they were a test she had never requested. To Camilla, they represented a position she believed she had finally secured. One royal order had brought all three emotions into collision, and none of them could speak honestly without exposing what the monarchy preferred to keep hidden. Charles had never believed his mother's possessions should remain sealed away as relics. He saw royal objects as living symbols, meant to serve the institution rather than become frozen memorials to a lost reign. The late queen's personal collection, meaning the jewels and possessions connected directly to her life and service, carried both private emotion and public responsibility. Yet each time the king opened an inventory connected to Elizabeth, duty collided with grief. He wanted the sapphires seen again, but choosing who should wear them meant deciding who would carry part of her identity forward. Catherine understood that danger better than anyone. Over the years, she had worn inherited royal pieces with care, always using them to honor the women who came before her without appearing to take their place. She had never treated jewelry as decoration alone. Every brooch, necklace, or pair of earrings carried a message about continuity, remembrance, and rank. Now the message had become far louder than she wanted. Catherine turned to William in private and admitted what frightened her most. The public might interpret the transfer as ambition. They might see a future queen celebrating another woman's loss when she felt only pressure and sorrow. William listened before telling her that Charles had selected every brooch himself. The prince had discovered this through the signed inventory, not through a recommendation from courtiers. His father had studied each piece, marked each selection, and made every choice personally. Camilla received a different version of the truth. She sat beside her dresser and removed a sapphire pin from the outfit prepared for an upcoming engagement. The queen consort held it for a moment before asking whether the palace had already begun preparing for a reign beyond her. Her dresser could not answer. One of the transferred brooches had quietly been reserved for Camilla's future use, and she had believed it would remain available whenever duty required it. Charles had redirected it deliberately. William then found a notation attached to that piece. It linked the change to a private disagreement at an anniversary ceremony honoring Elizabeth. Catherine had been present. Camilla had been present. And what happened between them had changed the king's mind. And when that forgotten ceremony was examined more closely, the transfer no longer looked sudden. It looked like the final consequence of a moment the palace had desperately tried to bury. Months before Charles signed the transfer, a single exchange changed the fate of the sapphires. It happened during a private rehearsal for a national service marking Queen Elizabeth's legacy. There were no cameras, no public witnesses, and almost no warning. Catherine reached toward one of the late monarch's brooches, believing she had been instructed to wear it. Camilla stopped her. The words that followed lasted less than a minute, but Charles would later treat that minute as the point of no return. Catherine had arrived at St. George's Chapel expecting a quiet rehearsal, not a confrontation. The chapel, a royal place of worship inside Windsor Castle, was being prepared for a national service honoring Elizabeth's life and reign. Her part in the ceremony had been carefully chosen. Charles wanted the princess to represent continuity, the passing of duty, memory, and public trust from the late monarch's generation toward the future crown. He had personally approved the sapphire brooch because Elizabeth had worn it during moments of national importance. Catherine entered the robing room and found the jewel beside her gloves. An aide confirmed the king's instruction, and she reached toward it with visible hesitation. Camilla entered moments later, noticed the open case, and stopped. The queen consort asked who had authorized its use. When Catherine quietly answered that Charles had, Camilla's expression hardened. She stated that jewels associated with a reigning queen should never be assigned without consulting the current queen. Catherine pulled her hand away immediately. She offered to wear nothing and insisted she had never requested the brooch. Her voice remained controlled, but humiliation had already settled over the room. Camilla did not retreat. She replied that understanding boundaries was part of royal duty, especially for someone preparing to occupy a greater place within the monarchy. The words were calm. Their meaning was not. Charles heard the final sentence from the corridor. He paused outside the door, but refused to create a public dispute during a service devoted to his mother. The king continued toward the chapel without confronting either woman. Hours later, however, he summoned a private secretary and ordered the complete sapphire collection file placed on his desk. Elizabeth's former dresser arrived that evening, carrying a sealed note preserved among the late queen's personal records. In a documented account attached to the collection file, she explained that the monarch had wanted selected sapphires transferred to Catherine once her public responsibilities expanded. Charles read the instruction twice. What had begun as an uncomfortable rehearsal now felt like a challenge to his mother's wishes. The eventual transfer was therefore never simply about jewelry. It became the king's delayed answer to Camilla's warning, Catherine's humiliation, and Elizabeth's final intention. Once Camilla realized that Charles had acted because of that private confrontation, grief turned into anger, and anger demanded a face-to-face reckoning. The confrontation began with a chair being moved. Camilla entered Charles's sitting room, pulled it away from the table, and placed herself directly opposite him. Between them lay the signed transfer order. She did not ask whether it was genuine. She asked why her husband had allowed her to discover it through an aide. Charles looked at the paper, then at her, knowing that whatever he said next would redefine both their marriage and their partnership on the throne. Camilla kept her voice low, but every word carried anger. No courtiers stood nearby to soften the exchange. No private secretary could interrupt. The sovereign, meaning the reigning monarch with final authority over personal royal property, had acted alone, and the queen consort wanted to know why his wife had been excluded from a decision touching her position so directly. Charles answered that Elizabeth's sealed note had left him no room for avoidance. His authority gave him the power to act, but his mother's written wish gave him the responsibility. Camilla leaned closer. She accused him of turning jewelry into a public declaration, lifting Catherine higher, while quietly diminishing the woman who had endured years of hostility beside him. She reminded the king of the criticism, isolation, and humiliation she had survived to support his future. Now, she said, the palace appeared ready to reward that loyalty by looking beyond her. Charles did not raise his voice. That made his reply cut deeper. Her devotion, he told her, mattered to him. But loyalty did not grant anyone the right to redirect Elizabeth's wishes. Camilla stared at him, wounded by the separation he had drawn between husband and monarch. She had expected resistance. She had not expected such finality. Camilla then disclosed the detail she had kept from everyone else. Through a documented request sent to Royal Collection staff, she had reserved one sapphire brooch for a future Commonwealth ceremony. The Commonwealth, a voluntary association of nations linked by shared history and cooperation, remained central to her public duties. She believed Charles had silently approved because he never objected. Charles admitted he knew. He had allowed the request to remain unanswered while deciding whether she understood the difference between access and ownership. The queen consort could wear historic jewels when duty required, but she could not treat availability as possession. Camilla's face changed. The silence between them became colder than the argument. Camilla rose and asked whether this was truly about Elizabeth, or whether he was declaring Catherine the monarchy's real female center. Charles removed his glasses, placed them beside the order, and met her gaze. It is about who must carry this forward. Camilla did not answer. She closed the door behind her. That answer did more than end the argument. It exposed the deeper machinery of succession, symbolism, and control operating behind Charles's decision. Royal power is rarely announced in plain language. It is communicated through seats at ceremonies, names on invitations, access to rooms, and the jewels placed upon a woman's coat. Charles understood that transferring Elizabeth's sapphires would speak more loudly than any palace statement. Yet the decision was not shaped by symbolism alone. Behind the order stood legal custody, private instructions, succession planning, and one king's growing determination to ensure that the monarchy's most powerful objects followed its future rather than its present. William found his father waiting in the library with 3 files open before him. The prince did not question whether the transfer was lawful. He asked whether Catherine was emotionally prepared to carry symbols so closely tied to the Elizabeth. Charles understood the concern, but the rules were clear. Jewels held by the crown belonged to the monarchy as an institution, while pieces in the sovereign's private collection remained under the monarch's personal authority. A written royal direction could permanently assign those private objects to another custodian. Charles controlled the sapphires because Elizabeth's death had placed them under his authority. Their ceremonial importance did not change that fact. The king could preserve them, lend them, or transfer them. Yet William sensed that legal certainty had not made the decision easier. His father kept looking at the sealed inventory as though it contained something more painful than gemstones. Charles finally admitted why he had delayed. Opening his mother's collection felt like dismantling the last room in which she still seemed alive. Every label carried her handwriting. Every case held a memory he had not been ready to disturb. The monarch had told himself that patience was respect. But the confrontation at the chapel forced him to recognize that silence was allowing rivalry to grow around Elizabeth's legacy. Charles opened a smaller file and handed William the sealed note. Elizabeth had named Catherine as the future custodian of selected sapphire pieces once her constitutional role became central. A constitutional role meant the public duties connected to supporting the sovereign and preparing for the responsibilities of a future reign. The instruction was precise. It was also deeply personal. William read the final passage twice. Elizabeth warned that the jewels must never become instruments of competition between royal women. The prince folded the note carefully and looked toward his father. In that moment, he understood that Charles had not acted from cold strategy. The king was carrying grief, guilt, and fear. The fear that old rivalries would poison another generation. The order was legally secure, but its human cost was about to become visible. Camilla's household would see the cases leave. Catherine's team would receive them. No official wording could hide what that movement meant. And when the jewel cases were finally moved, the palace discovered that even a silent transfer could leave behind a trail of humiliation, loyalty, and unmistakable division. At 7:09, the sapphire cases left the secure royal vault under dual escort. The movement had been scheduled before most of the household arrived, but secrecy failed almost immediately. A member of Camilla's staff recognized the inventory seals. Catherine's private secretary was waiting at the other end. No announcement was made, yet everyone in the corridor understood what they were witnessing. Elizabeth's jewels were physically crossing from one royal sphere into another, and the palace could no longer pretend the decision was merely administrative. The handover followed strict procedure. 2 officers checked every seal against the inventory, while Catherine's representative examined Charles's signed authorization. An inventory was the official record listing each jewel, its condition, and its approved custodian. Only after every number matched did the cases pass into her designated care. The transfer was lawful, permanent, and impossible to dismiss as rumor. Catherine refused to move the collection directly to Kensington Palace. She requested that every brooch remain secured until independent experts had documented its condition and preservation needs. Her caution mattered, because any sudden appearance could make the transfer seem like a victory display. She wanted Elizabeth's possessions protected before they became part of a public argument. Camilla's dresser watched the cases pass and recognized the seal attached to the brooch, reserved for the Commonwealth ceremony. She later delivered the news privately. The Queen Consort dismissed everyone from the room, then sat without removing her coat. She had expected Charles's order to hurt. She had not expected to feel the loss become physical as the jewel moved beyond her reach. Catherine opened the largest case beside William after the formal inspection. The prince stayed close as she lifted the inner covering and found Elizabeth's handwritten identification card. The familiar writing broke her composure. She began to cry, not because she had gained something, but because the inheritance felt unbearably intimate. William reminded her that the late monarch had chosen responsibility, not replacement. A smaller compartment held a sapphire brooch rarely seen in public. Beside it rested a note directing that its first appearance should occur at an event centered on service rather than status. Catherine read the instruction twice. The message offered a path forward, but before she could decide, the transfer escaped the palace. A staff member leaked the movement of the cases while withholding the private papers. Senior aides immediately suspected that someone wanted Camilla's exclusion exposed without revealing Elizabeth's true wishes. Charles received the warning during breakfast, placed his cup down untouched, and ordered that no one blame Catherine or push her into a rushed appearance. The pressure now rested on her. She could hide the sapphires and allow resentment to define them, or accept their meaning without turning them into weapons. The answer comes not through another order from Charles, but through a quiet exchange between Catherine and William that transforms the jewels from a source of conflict into a personal vow. Long after the household had fallen silent, Catherine asked William to join her in the small room where the sealed cases had been placed. No advisors stood nearby. No protocol officer supplied the correct words. She opened only one box and rested Elizabeth's sapphire brooch between them. William expected her to discuss security, appearances, or public reaction. Instead, Catherine asked a simpler question: could she accept the late Queen's trust without allowing the jewel to become a weapon against another woman? William sat beside her and studied the brooch without touching it. He reminded Catherine that Elizabeth had never used jewelry as decoration alone. Each piece carried memory, service, and duty. A protocol officer was a palace official who guided royal conduct and ceremonial rules, but no official could answer the moral question before them. Refusing the transfer might calm the conflict, yet it could also reject the late monarch's deliberate wish. Catherine admitted that she felt sympathy for Camilla. The chapel confrontation had wounded her and made her feel like an intruder inside the role she was expected to inherit. But she understood the queen consort's humiliation. One woman had received the jewels, another had watched them leave. Catherine feared that accepting them publicly would make her appear victorious when she felt nothing close to victory. William took a long breath before confessing his own anger. He had resented Charles for placing his wife at the center of another royal dispute. The prince believed his father should have protected her from the symbolism surrounding the transfer, yet after reading Elizabeth's note, he understood the king's deeper fear. Charles was trying to stop an old pattern of rivalry from surviving into the next reign, even if his method had caused fresh pain. Catherine turned the brooch carefully and noticed a small handwritten reference on its identification card. The entry connected it to a private meeting Elizabeth held with her shortly before she married William. During that conversation, the late queen had worn the same sapphire. Catherine remembered the warmth of the exchange, the questions about duty, and the quiet assurance that she would not face royal life alone. The jewel had been a sign of acceptance long before she knew its meaning. Catherine closed the box and made her decision. She would first wear the brooch at a charitable gathering devoted to carers, not at a banquet or state procession. A state procession was a formal royal journey, used for major national ceremonies, and choosing service over grandeur would fulfill Elizabeth's written instruction. She took William's hand and promised that she would accept the sapphires, but never use them to declare victory over Camilla. The prince understood. Their choice gave Charles a path forward, though the first public image would decide how the nation interpreted everything. When Catherine finally stepped forward wearing Elizabeth's sapphire, one carefully chosen public moment turned a private palace struggle into a national judgment. The first photograph appeared before the palace statement was released. Catherine stood outside the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, after meeting unpaid carers, wearing a simple navy coat and one unmistakable sapphire brooch over her heart. She was not dressed for conquest. She was not attending a coronation banquet. Yet within minutes, the image had crossed Britain. It confirmed the transfer more powerfully than any document could. Elizabeth's jewel had returned to public life, and it had returned on the woman expected to shape the monarchy's next chapter. Catherine had chosen the engagement with care. The Royal Hospital, Chelsea, a historic home supporting retired soldiers, offered none of the grandeur associated with a state occasion. She spent the morning listening to people caring for elderly relatives, disabled children, and seriously ill partners without payment. That setting mattered. Elizabeth's instruction had demanded service rather than status, and the princess obeyed it completely. The sapphire did not appear as a prize. It appeared as a promise. The palace released its confirmation minutes later. The short statement declared that Charles had permanently entrusted the selected sapphire set to Catherine for preservation and future royal service. Royal service meant the official duties performed on behalf of the sovereign and the country. The wording avoided rivalry, but one fact could not be softened. The transfer was complete. Charles watched the coverage alone. When the camera focused on the brooch his mother had worn, the king's expression changed. He leaned forward, then lowered his eyes as grief overtook royal control. The jewel looked alive again, yet its return reminded him that Elizabeth was gone. His decision had succeeded publicly, but privately, it reopened the loss behind it. Camilla saw the same broadcast from Clarence House. She remained silent until an aide asked whether the television should be turned off. the queen consort refused. After watching Catherine speak with a carer, she admitted that the princess had chosen the right occasion. But they revealed reluctant respect. The next morning, one front page carried Catherine's photograph beneath the headline, "The Queen's Sapphire, the Future's Promise." Outside Buckingham Palace, a woman raised an old picture of Elizabeth, wearing the brooch beside the new image. A small crowd gathered around her, and the comparison crossed social media within minutes. A national broadcaster described the appearance as, "not the crowning of Catherine, but the recognition of continuity." That sentence calmed accusations that Camilla had been deliberately humiliated. The public meaning seemed settled. The sapphire represented duty moving forward, not one woman defeating another. Yet Charles knew headlines could not heal a family. Catherine had carried the jewel with dignity. Camilla had acknowledged her choice. Now the king had to bring both women together and explain what his order truly meant. The world had delivered its verdict through headlines and photographs, but the final judgment belonged inside the family, where Charles now had to close the wound his order had opened. The final conversation did not take place before cameras or beneath palace chandeliers. Charles invited Catherine and Camilla into his private drawing room and placed no documents on the table. The order had already been signed. The jewels had already moved. The nation had already seen the sapphire. What remained was not a question of ownership, but of meaning. Charles had to tell two women why he made the decision, and both had to decide whether the monarchy could move forward without turning inheritance into defeat. Charles spoke first and made one point unmistakable. The transfer was final. No headline, household complaint, or private discomfort would reverse it. The drawing room, a private palace space used for personal meetings rather than official ceremony, gave them no institutional shield. The king explained that Elizabeth's sapphires had gone to Catherine because her future role required her to connect royal memory with continuity. The choice did not weaken Camilla's position as queen. It prepared the monarchy for what must eventually come after them all. Camilla held his gaze before admitting what had driven her anger. She feared the institution she had served for years was already looking beyond her, reducing her long journey to an uncomfortable chapter before Catherine. The queen had survived rejection, public hostility, and years of judgment. Watching the sapphires move made her feel that even after reaching the throne, she could still be quietly erased. Catherine answered without defensiveness. She had never viewed the brooches as victory, and she refused to let Elizabeth's possessions become evidence that one royal woman had to lose for another to matter. The princess understood that inheritance could easily become humiliation when handled without care. She would carry the jewels, but she would not wear them as trophies. Charles accepted the blame. By keeping the process secret, he had created the very humiliation he hoped to prevent. The monarch had mistaken silence for protection and authority for emotional control. Camilla listened, then made her final choice. She would not request a reversal. Instead, she told Catherine to wear the sapphires confidently, because hesitation would make Elizabeth's trust appear shameful. Catherine crossed the room and placed the late queen's handwritten identification card into Camilla's hands. She read the words slowly, then returned the card without bitterness. No apology erased everything, but the hostility finally loosened. The transfer meant neither Camilla's removal nor Catherine's coronation in waiting. It marked Charles's acceptance that preserving the monarchy required releasing his mother's legacy into the next generation. Catherine became the sapphire's guardian. Camilla retained her dignity. The king finally separated grief from duty. And so the sapphire set completed its most important journey, not from one palace vault to another, but from a reign remembered with love into a future finally ready to carry its weight. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.